vulture, called the Mad Dog by the clans, turned toward her, stitching ruby fire into her flashman's chest armor. The machine's right arm pulse lasers missed, but its left arm weapons were right on target. The Mad Dog followed up the laser attack with a 1-2 punch from its torso-mounted LRMs. Missiles shattered armor all across Sandra's front. She answered with her trio of Celetix radonic large lasers, scoring 2 hits on the clan machine. All of which was great, except her heat level spiked. Bastard must have gotten one of her heat sinks along with the armor. The Mad Dog came right back with another alpha strike. How are they doing this? She thought frantically. When the clans descended upon the Inner Sphere in the fall of 3049, information escaping from the encounters with this new and mysterious threat was scant and oftentimes incorrect. The interstellar game of telephone was definitely in play concerning the advanced technology that the clan warriors were wielding against their Inner Sphere defenders. Reports included claims of invulnerability, mechs that could never overheat, and weapons that seemingly had no range limitations. While the stories did contain grains of truth to them, it was difficult to discern what was real and what was hyperbole. The 60-ton Mad Dog, one of the most commonly fielded heavy omnimechs among the invading clans, was a good example of how assumptions and fear can result in inaccurate appraisals of a threat. When first encountered within the Free Russelhog Republic and Draconis Combine, the Mad Dog was incorrectly identified as a fire support battlemech. With its large sloped LRM launchers in the shoulders, it wasn't an unfair assumption, as Mechwarriors spotted the skulking predator of a mech that was similar to the Archer, firing flights of missiles at targets. Of course, we know now that such behavior was considered abhorrent to the clans who had developed their rigid and ritualized way of war in the time since Nicholas Kerensky laid down the foundation of their societies. Zellbriggen dictated one-on-one fights unless there was outside intervention. Contrary to assumptions, the Mad Dog would fight its own battles, and the warriors that piloted it would not be afraid to stomp into the fray. But what is the Mad Dog's story? To answer this question, we must go back several thousand years to discuss a certain disgruntled Mesopotamian purchaser of substandard copper. Just kidding. Following the successful debut of the first Omnimech, the Coil, Clan Coyote was looking to take the lessons they learned from the design to produce a follow-up battlemech that would push the technology further. In 2857, the 60-ton Lupus was approved for production. With a Vlar 300 fusion engine, 9 tons of ferrofibrous armor, endosteel, and 23 tons of pod space, the Lupus was seen as an efficient platform for rapid support operations. When deployed, the variety of standard configurations demonstrated a wide variety of options for the Lupus's pod space. It wasn't long before the other clans wanted to either get their hands on the Lupus or build a similar battlemech of their own. Inspired by the successful design, and possibly after being thoroughly trounced by a Lupus in a trial, Clan Smoke Jaguar put their scientist case to work building their own 60-ton heavy Omnimech. After some trials and tribulations, the final design of the Mad Dog would look curiously similar to the Lupus, including the leg configuration, shoulder-mounted missile bays, and skulking overall look. By 2963, the Mad Dog was ready for full production, 106 years after the debut of the Lupus. Oh, BattleTech timelines are silly sometimes. Constructed around a 300 Type 1 XL fusion engine and Eden Mark 60 OM standard frame, the Mad Dog set itself apart from its inspiration. Eschewing the endosteel, more critical locations were opened up on the mech. 12 double heat sinks were added to the Mad Dog as a foundation for the various loadouts, and finally 8.5 tons of compound SJ6 CW ferrofibrous armor was added to keep out all the bothersome incoming enemy fire. That left the Mad Dog with a whopping 28 tons of pod space and 36 hardpoint criticals for weaponry and equipment. Not too shabby when compared to the 65-ton Hellbringer's 28.75 tons of pod space and the 55-ton Stormcrow's 23 tons devoted to gear. The primary configuration looks similar to the Lupus's as it features twin LRM-20 launchers in the shoulders. However, it quickly diverges from the rest of the build with the addition of 2 large pulse lasers and 2 medium pulse lasers split between the arms. It's a deceptively simple loadout, but one that lent itself to confusion as the planets of the Inner Sphere began to fall one by one to the clan invasion forces. Owning its predatory avian appearance, the Mad Dog was given the moniker of Vulture by the earliest Free Russelhogian forces that encountered it. Oddly enough, in the Draconis Combine, it was labeled the Hagataka, which was translated to mean the equivalent of vulture as well. Clearly, the mech had a look to it. Primarily fielded by the smoke jaguars and ghost bears, the Mad Dog would eventually be spotted among all the invading clan Tumans. Later, it was discovered the mech was common among the homeworld clans as well. The vulture pursuing them rounded the corner at the top of the massive steps. Swigard locked her heavy autocannon on the mech and triggered the weapon. The bear warrior was too fast for her and pulled back as the multiple shells battered the wall. The vulture came around and unleashed a full barrage at her. Laser fire riddled up and down the right and left side of her hunchback, blasting away the remaining armor. Swigard struggled to keep her mech upright, but the charging quintet of Mara slamming into her hunchback sealed her fate. While the Mad Dog was popular among the bears and jaguars, one of the most famous mech warriors to pilot the battle mech was actually a Jade Falcon named Joanna. Going by her codex alone, the cantankerous mech warrior might be overlooked as rather inconsequential and lackluster. However, Joanna's involvement with Aiden Pride of the Falcon Guard placed her in the crosshairs of historical change. Some of the best examples of the Mad Dog in action come to us from reports of her in action against the Com Guard on Tukayyid and in trials against fellow clan warriors. There was a lull in the storm. For a moment, Joanna saw Reveal Pride's Timberwolf just a few hundred meters from her Mad Dog. In the swirling snow, it was a mere outline walking away from her. Maybe he was not aware of her presence nearby. Maybe his scanners were off too, and he did not know where she was. Maybe it was a good time for an ambush. Reacting quickly, she triggered a salvo of SRMs and found out how aware of her presence he was. While often described as the mech warrior too angry to die, Joanna was an interesting person because under all that attitude and hardened carapace of annoyance was a softie who wanted to do right by her clan and her friends, even if she would publicly insist that she had no friends. For example, during the last minutes of the Falcon Guard retreat under fire on Tukayyid, it's Joanna who first volunteers to stay behind and try to rescue mech warrior Diana from her disabled battle mech. "It is mech warrior Diana, sir. She's trapped. Somehow the ejection—" "I heard that, Star Captain. It is unfortunate, but there is nothing we can do. Our orders are to get to the Raptor immediately. Die bravely, mech warrior." "If I die," Diana said, her voice trembling, "I plan to die bravely." "We'll leave her behind then?" Joanna asked. "All techs have left the planet, medic or otherwise. There is no one to extricate her." "I will extricate her," Joanna said. We might have to give Joanna her own video someday. I've always said that the best Jade Falcons are crappy Jade Falcons. In Joanna's case, she was a good Jade Falcon in spite of all the other Jade Falcons around her. If you know, you know. Critics of the Prime configuration of the Mad Dog were quick to point out that the 1 ton of ammunition for each LRM launcher left the mech much less powerful after those ammo bins ran dry, which they would, quite quickly. The slightly more savvy critique points to the lack of heat sinks that make firing both the large pulse lasers and both LRM-20s at the same time a quick way to end up with heat issues. Doing so at a run left the Prime config 10 plus into the red, and that's not even discussing the 2 medium pulse lasers. One of the more common tweaks I saw playing back in the day was pulling both medium lasers in favor of 4 additional heat sinks, 2 of which were placed into the side torsos. It allowed for more liberal use of the LRMs and large pulse lasers, while also making the LRM ammunition and XL engine criticals slightly less likely to be destroyed in a critical hit situation. If you're not on board with the primary configuration, don't sweat it because there's plenty of other configs out there to fit your every want and desire. The Mad Dog A configuration, for example, was a very different creature which definitely threw water on the assumption that the Mad Dog was a fire support battle mech. Starting with its long-range weaponry, an ERPPC in the right arm could hammer opponents consistently. Backing it up in the left arm was the much more modest LB-5X autocannon fed by 2 tons of ammunition. As much fun as hitting targets with the ERPPC is, the goal of the Config A Mechwarrior was to close in on an enemy in order to employ those 6 SRM-6 launchers split evenly between the left and right torso. If you're like me and went to public school, it takes a minute to sort out the possible damage. That's 6 launchers with 6 missiles each, doing 2 damage apiece, for a possible 72 damage if all the missiles flew true. While obviously most of the time that wouldn't happen, even if just half the missiles hit, 36 damage spread over a target provided plenty of opportunity to hit critical systems and exploit rents in armor created by earlier interactions with the ERPPC. The Mad Dog A is a killer, no doubt about it. If you're looking for something a little more balanced, the B configuration may be your cup of tea. It featured a pair of ER large lasers split between the arms and an LRM-15 aided by an Artemis IV fire control system in the left torso. At closer range, 3 medium pulse lasers in the right arm provided accurate and still powerful fire. Finally, a pair of Streak SRM-6s placed into the right torso were death sentences for any light mechs that wandered too close. Once again, the greatest limiting factor on the Mad Dog's damage was the 12 double heat sinks, which were taxed heavily by that B configuration. Firing just the ER large lasers while on the run left the mech 2+ into the red. Adding in the LRM-20 to the mix pushes that to 8+. While not devastating, the combo of those 3 weapons was a gamble. Overall, the B configuration can be powerful but requires a steady and calm hand. Knowing what weapons to bring into the fight and when to use them could make the difference between victory and needing to be identified by your dental records. The Mad Dog was under no such constraints. It carried only 2 weapons. Gauss rifles that could spit out a melon-sized ball of hardened steel at Mach 2 every 10 seconds. Twice the melon struck home, shattering most of the armor plate protecting Rorschach's right and center torsos. Rorschach now had to keep the exposed side away from the Mad Dog, which meant he could not make use of the missile rack mounted on his mech's left arm. Circling and weaving around his almost stationary opponent, Rorschach stayed in almost constant motion, his slow and steady fire gradually chipping away the Mad Dog's armor. His opponent had yet to score another hit with his Gauss cannon, but Rorschach knew it was only a matter of time. Popular among bold and possibly reckless mech warriors was the Configuration C Mad Dog, which didn't bother with a litany of small and medium weapons and instead went all in on a pair of Gauss rifles split between the arms. The possible 30 damage per shot in 2 15-point clumps was too tantalizing to pass up for many who were willing to gamble on that one lucky shot that could take down an opponent. The downsides included only having 16 shots per rifle. Without secondary weapons, the C configuration was dependent upon support from other starmates or nearby logistics lines. Additionally, the configuration doesn't take advantage of the existing 12 heat sinks, which can feel like you're not maximizing the possibilities for the mech. It's one of those examples of how an Omni-Mech can be limited by its hard-locked equipment. Overall, your opinion of the Configuration C will boil down to how you feel about putting all your eggs into one basket with those 2 Gauss rifles. I guess it would be 2 baskets. Anyway, it's a high-risk, high-reward option for those of you who want to roll the dice on it. From primary to C config, those were the original standard configurations for the Mad Dog. Once contact was made with the inner sphere, additional configurations were adopted to reflect specific needs or mission criteria. For example, the Mad Dog Double D configuration was built around an interesting combination of weapons that is reminiscent of the B configuration. A pair of LB-2X autocannons were placed into the left arm, which could do a little damage out to an incredible range. They were backed up by an LRM-20 aided by an Artemis IV fire control system and fed by a single ton of ammunition. For close-range conflict resolution, a trio of medium pulse lasers were installed into the right arm. Finally, a Streak SRM-6 was added to the right torso to add an additional ammo-conserving punch. Nearly all the 24 missiles launched from her Mad Dog found their target. Explosions blossomed all over the hapless hunchback as it staggered back against the canyon wall. Throwing her mech into reverse, Eadeh continued firing with her arm-mounted lasers as she backed up. The explosions continued, most likely from a missile or laser touching off the hunchback's autocannon ammunition. Something rose up through the billowing smoke, pouring from the Eadeh mech, and Eadeh could just make out the shape of an ejection seat rocketing the mech warrior to safety. The next official configuration was the spawn of necessity on the charred battlefields of Tukayyid in 3052. After the first days of the trial, the predictions of a swift victory over the Comguard were an inconvenient memory as the clan Ghost Bear forces sought to regroup and rethink their strategy. Ammunition-dependent designs had run through the ready supply, and there were simply not enough autocannon rounds and missiles to secure victory. Of particular concern for the Bears were their Mad Dogs, who had made up a large percentage of their remaining forces planetside. The battle mech had performed well, but without ammunition and lacking jump jets, it was struggling against the hit-and-run strikes the Comguard was using to whittle down the clan. After looking through the available equipment and historical records for past configurations, the Bears settled upon what was deemed the Configuration S. It relied upon a pair of ERPPCs to do most of the damage, yet it was backed up in the mid and short range with a trio of medium pulse lasers spread across the left, right, and center torso. In order to provide some advance warning of enemy movements, an active probe was added to the left torso. 4 additional heat sinks were added to keep the mech from becoming too much of a hotbox, and finally, at long last, 5 jump jets were added, which pushed the movement profile to 585 and provided the Mad Dog with its first opportunity to leap toward enemies, all fists and elbows like a whirling dervish. The hapless Comguard might scream out, "No, no!" but all the Mad Dog S hears is "Who wants cake?" and the Mad Dog S always wants cake. The extra heat sinks allowed the Mad Dog S to run and fire both ERPPCs while remaining heat neutral, and when close, it was similarly easy to lay off one PPC to bring in the 3 medium pulse lasers for a heat deficit. When the refit Mad Dogs smashed into the Comguard on May 9th of 3052 in the smoking and charred remains of Hulf Forest, they performed well. Able to keep their distance and fire the PPCs consistently forced the Comguard to try and close over open ground. Later, in an urbanized area, the Beagle active probe and jump jets helped the Mad Dogs maintain tactical awareness. The intelligence they gathered allowed the Ghost Bears to shift forces quickly to meet the ever-changing situation. With the configuration having proved its mettle, Lore Master Lowry Singh notified the other clans of the effectiveness of the S configuration. Unfortunately, following Tukayyid, the S configuration fell out of fashion in the face of loadouts with newer technology or different goals. One of those new configurations was designated the D, and it was first spotted in 3054. Though it would return to the classic 580 movement with lasers and missiles, this configuration had a cutting edge to it in the form of an advanced tactical missile system. The Mad Dog D carried 2 ATM-12 launchers and the traditional shoulder mounts, each fed by 3 tons of ammunition. Backing them up in the mid and short ranges were a pair of ER medium lasers and a pair of ER small lasers split between the arms, along with 2 medium pulse lasers located in the center torso. 1 additional heatsink was added to bring the total to 13. While capable of firing extended-range missiles, the true power of the Mad Dog D is displayed at short range, where the lasers and ATM launchers firing high-explosive ammunition could do a terrifying 110 damage if the dice gods smile upon you. Of course, an alpha strike would leave the Mad Dog D at 12 plus heat, but it may be worth it just to see the look on your opponent's face when you announce you're doing it. Stepping forward to 3059, as usual, there's always some knucklehead who decides heavy lasers are the future. So here's the Configuration H. The traditional missile launchers were found in the shoulders, though this time they're LRM-15s aided by Artemis IV. They're also fed by 2 tons of ammunition apiece. In the right arm, a large heavy laser was installed which could reach out to 15 hexes, though at a +1 to hit. The 16 damage is nice, but that 18 heat is punishing. Thankfully, the Configuration H provides soothing action to the affected area in the form of 8 additional double heat sinks, bringing the total to 20. At close range, a trio of medium-heavy lasers in the left arm can do 10 damage apiece, though at 7 heat per shot, and that's +1 to hit. Even with the 20 double heat sinks, consistently firing most of the weapons at short range limits the Config H's damage output. The decreased accuracy and short range of the lasers is punishing. Unless you're a big heavy laser fan, I'd probably pass on this Mad Dog. Taking it another leap down the timeline to 3069, the Mad Dog E variant shares a strong vibe with the C variant in its use of 2 large ballistic weapons in lieu of a variety of other types. The 2 Hyper Assault Gauss Rifle 30s provided the tantalizing opportunity to cause significant damage at long range, though they come with a couple of painful caveats. The first was the distributed nature of the 30 damage in 5-point groupings. This could result in a sandpapering effect on a target that was tough enough to tank through it. The other, in my opinion, fatal flaw in the Mad Dog E is the fact that it could only carry 4 shots per rifle. This severely limits the mech's battlefield effectiveness and would essentially tie it to defensive operations where ammunition could be continually fed into the Mad Dog's hoppers. Thankfully, if you're a fan of the Hyper Assault Gauss rifles, the F configuration might be a more reasonable option. First recorded in 3069, the F configuration compromises with the installation of 2 HAG-20s in the arms, each fed by 2 tons of ammunition, which is 12 shots apiece. This time, the HAGs weren't alone, and the Mad Dog F was graced by 4 ER medium lasers split between the left and right torso. The F config is a nicely balanced machine, and one that could be tremendously useful on the battlefield if it can consistently hammer targets with those HAG-20s. Against lighter targets or already damaged heavies and assaults, those Gauss rifles could rack up kills. As Leadah's Mad Dog rounded the corner, it was obvious that she had arrived in the proverbial nick of time. Jake's elementals were swarming around a damaged avatar, which swatted at them with its boxy arms like a human beset by bees. Reese's Hellbringer was backed up toward Leadah's position, smoke rising from multiple armor breaches as he fired at the Sunder and the avatar pursuing him. Petra's Stormcrow sniped at them with laser fire from behind a pile of boulders. She must be out of autocannon ammunition as well as severely damaged. Switching her selector to long-range munitions, Leadah signaled her arrival with a twin salvo aimed at the avatar not currently covered with elementals. Her missiles arced up and over Reese's backpedaling mech, then slammed down into the already damaged avatar to devastating effect. This is a good opportunity to take a minute to point out that once again, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. When the states of the Inner Sphere took their pummeling from Mad Dogs, lessons were learned. For both the Lyran Commonwealth and the Draconis Combine, a considerable effort was put into creating their own improved designs. For the Draconis Combine, following their victory over the Smoke Jaguars and the Nova Cats on Luthien, the salvaged clan Mad Dogs presented a unique opportunity to cobble together a Combine version of the mech. While obviously not able to replicate the Omnimech 1-for-1, the resulting 70-ton mech named the Avatar sought to get as close as possible. Bulkier, slower, but with better armor coverage, the Avatar represented a good faith effort to create better Inner Sphere Omnimechs. Within the Lyran Commonwealth, the desire to create a swift hunter mech incorporated lessons learned by engineers who had the opportunity to pour technical data borrowed from a raid on Clan Jade Falcon bases on Twycross. Seeing that clan designers had come up with a novel way of protecting the Mad Dog's sensitive electronics in its cockpit from interference in the fusion engine, Tharhi's engineers decided to incorporate them into the Bushwhacker design. It had already been in development for years before the clans had arrived, but this was the perfect way to finish it up. While definitely not an attempt to directly copy the Mad Dog, the BSW X1 Bushwhacker did share some of those internal design choices that helped make the mech become so successful. Taking our next step down the timeline, the Mad Dog Configuration G is our next stop in 3093. Reminiscent of the Tukayyid Configuration S, the G features an ERPPC in the left arm as its primary damage dealer at long range. However, in the left torso, the traditional LRMs are delivered through the use of Streak LRM-15 launchers fed by 1 ton of ammunition. In the mid and short ranges, 3 ER medium pulse lasers provided slightly more accurate fire out to 14 hexes. Finally, 2 Streak SRM-6s were installed into the right torso in hope of ruining some swift light mech's day should it wander too close. A 13th heatsink was added to help mitigate the heat from the ERPPC and lasers, but heat management will be important for those of you who go with a Configuration G. At long range, it's not an issue, but once the 3 lasers in the Streak SRM-6 enter into the mix, tough choices need to be made, lest it get very warm in your cockpit. Just 5 years later, in 3098, the Mad Dog V configuration leaned into the fire support role with the addition of an Arrow 4 launcher split between the right arm and torso. It's fed by 2 tons of ammunition stored in the left torso, providing 10 shots. For enemies closer than 102 hexes, an LRM-20 in the left torso fed by 2 tons of ammunition can be helpful. Finally, at mid and short range, the ER medium lasers and 2 medium pulse lasers were split between the arms. A 13th heatsink helped tackle the heat generated by the lasers. If you want to dip your toes into the water with an Arrow 4 system, the Mad Dog V configuration is a good pick, because it doesn't overdo it with the second launcher, which could leave it without much else for weaponry. The last official configuration that we're going to cover today is a return to form. By 3142, Clan Hell's Horses were the only ones in the Inner Sphere producing the original Mad Dog platform. Most of the other clans had moved on to the Mad Dog 3s and 4s by that point. However, if you're seeking to remain true to the original, the T configuration is a nod in that direction. The missile launchers are there in the form of 2 LRM-20s aided by Artemis V fire control systems for improved accuracy. They were each fed by 2 tons of ammunition, which adequately addresses the shortcomings from the original Prime. In the arms, 2 ER large lasers and 2 ER medium lasers are split evenly between the left and right arms. A 13th heatsink was added to help deal with the ER lasers, but much like with the primary configuration inspiration, heat management limits the mech's damage output. If you haven't yet tried out the Artemis 5 or really prefer ER large lasers to pulse lasers, the T configuration may be the one for you. Now finally, because my ego has reached a state of perpetual growth, I did put some time into coming up with a mech frog configuration for the Mad Dog. It wasn't as easy a task as first imagined, as so many existing configurations have a variety of weapons. In the interest of making a Mad Dog as agile as possible, the first items I added were 5 jump jets to push the overall movement profile to 585. I retained the 2 large pulse lasers from the primary configuration, but paired each of them with an ER medium laser. In the right and left torso, I added a Streak SRM-4. Both launchers are fed by a single ton of ammunition. Finally, to deal with any bothersome infantry or rebelling labor caste workers, a pair of flamers were split between the left and right torso. The MF config's 3 additional heatsinks can handle leaping the full 5 hexes while firing both large pulse lasers and 1 of the ER medium lasers while staying heat neutral. At close range, once the Streak SRM-4 is in place, some heat management will be necessary. Overall, I think I created a fun, agile scrapper version of the Mad Dog. If you want to try it out, I've included the record sheet for it in the video notes below. So why do we love the Mad Dog? While the 28 tons of pod space and the iconic look are obviously part of the appeal, this mech is as deeply ingrained in the IP as a Timberwolf or an Atlas. It has some of the best classic BattleTech art, and its use by Joanna across multiple novels and adventures helped the mech secure an even stronger connection to the universe. Most of the official configurations are solid and offer a variety of different ways to take the Mad Dog into battle. Many of my games of BattleTech growing up featured the Mad Dog, as it was my favorite mech before I discovered the Ebon Jaguar. If you have a story of how the Mad Dog either saved the day or ruined one, please let me know in the video comments below and we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you as always for coming by as we talked some BattleTech. If you enjoyed the video and feel it's worthy, don't forget the thumbs up button and even hitting subscribe. It'll make it much more likely you'll see my nonsense in the future. For those of you who have already taken that extra step of becoming channel members or supported on Ko-fi, thank you very much. Without you, none of this would be possible. Until we meet again, please take care of yourself and your loved ones by making the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.